how we provide zero trust with Duo. I think a lot of folks are familiar with Duo from the standpoint of our MFA product, but how do we extend that in the same platform and really deliver a full zero trust access? Um, as uh, as Michael said, I'm Ryan Benner. With me is Miles Musser, my TSA. Um, I'll go through a few slides here over the next 15, 20 minutes to set the table and give you the big picture. And then, of course, Miles is going to dive into the demos and basically show you that everything I say isn't complete BS and that this stuff actually works and works very well. We'll pause and take a few questions between the slides and the demos, and then again after the demos, if that works for everybody. So just a quick look at the agenda. So really, we've got to start by thinking about what's different in a zero trust approach. If you think about the traditional approach to network or application access, the typically once you get access to the network, whether it be by plugging in locally or connecting via wireless or connecting via VPN, you've got full unfettered access to everything internally, right? So you basically get interrogated once to prove who you are, and then you have unfettered access to move laterally wherever you want to go. With the zero trust approach, it's really the idea that every person is untrusted, every device is untrusted, and we've got to apply that at access to every application, right? So every time I access a new app, I want to ensure that it's the right person and we trust them. They're coming from the right location. They're using a device that we approve of. And then we apply that policy to that application so that they get just the right access that they need. That's really, in a nutshell, the zero trust approach. From a Duo perspective, we do just that, right? So we perform trust on our end users. Then we perform trust on our devices. What's the health of those devices? Are they managed? Are they personal devices? We we provide visibility into the attributes of both the users and the devices, and then we allow you to create policy around that and apply that at every application access. So let's start first at user trust. Again, this is where everybody knows us, right? We're the world's easiest and most secure MFA, right? It's simple. We've rolled out to tens of thousands of clients around the world. We have hundreds of thousands of authentications per day. Nobody does it better or easier than us. We have a really broad range of options on how we allow those authentications. And again, we're integrating with an IDP for your primary auth, and then we're providing that secondary auth. Now, soon you will see passwordless come out from us, and passwordless is basically the idea that we can leverage things like biometrics, hardware tokens, things like that as one of our authentication mechanisms, and get rid of the password, right, and still provide that dual factor authentication. From a device trust standpoint, right? You know, it's we see a lot of organizations do a pretty good job of managing their corporate devices, right? Usually we have MDMs and things like that that allow us to keep them updated and ensure that we're not our people aren't using devices that are out of date or have bad application or outdated applications on them. The challenge we see, and especially today, since we've all been remote now for almost 2 years, is what about all those personal devices? A lot of folks are using personal devices to access corporate applications, and frankly, most of them are just not covered under any type of MDM. So how do we ensure that across the spectrum of every device that's leveraged in our environment, we have the visibility into the device and its health, and then we can apply the correct policy around that to allow the right access. You know, from a visibility standpoint, as I said, we need to be able to see all of those devices that are accessing, not just the corporate devices. And the way we do it within our mobile device, from a mobile device standpoint, we've got code in our mobile device Duo application that allows us to collect that data, collect that health information, And then on the laptop and desktop, we have a device health app that gets, it's a tiny app that gets pushed down when you first access an application that you set the flag in Duo that says they need to have the device health app. It gets pushed down and installed and collects that device health info. So just a quick look at the type of info that we collect. As you can see, we're not collecting any type of personal data or data that can be tied to a specific person. This is all about the device and how well we, what the health of that device is and whether it conforms to a certain set of security criteria. And we can also tell whether that device is corporate owned or not by integrating with your MDM platforms with Active Directory and looking to see if that device is managed. Now, with that data, it allows us to assess the security posture. So we can tell, from a security posture standpoint, is the device encrypted or not? If it's a mobile device, are biometrics enabled, right? So if somebody's phone is stolen, you don't want a phone out there that doesn't have, isn't biometric enabled, that allows anybody to approve an MFA push approval, right? So these are the types of things that are important and critical in a zero trust environment. Now, of course, with all of that data, what do we do with it? We've got to create policy. So our policy engine allows you to create policies that can be applied globally to all users and all apps. We can apply it to a specific application, and we can apply it to specific groups or users. And that way we can establish very different levels of trust depending on the application being accessed and depending on the groups of folks who are doing the access. From a user policy perspective, we can do things like geolocation, where's that user accessing from? We can do where they, from an IP network address range, are they on an internal network? Are they on an external network? What authentication methods do we allow? There are certain environments where telephony and SMS authentication methods are not allowed because they're considered less secure. And whether or not their device is enrolled in, or they're enrolled in an IDP. Device policy, very similar, right? We talked about this a little bit. And, do we have screen lock enabled on our mobile device? Is it jailbroken or has it been tampered with? Has this device been seen before? Is it part of our MDM? Is the browser up to date? A lot of the attacks today leverage out of date browser code. So with those, we can take and then create a policy. And here's just a simple example. If we have an application in AWS that we're protecting with Duo, and we only want to allow the engineering team with a trusted device to access, it's very simple to create a policy that would block sales team, for instance, even if they're on a trusted device. The engineering team, if they're using an untrusted device, whether that be maybe a personal device or a device that doesn't conform to current hygiene or updates, and then just allow the engineering team with secure devices. So very easy to create that. Part of the demos today, Miles going to show you how that works in practice. And then lastly, what I do also want to mention is we have an application called Trust Monitor that's a user behavior analytics engine. And what this engine does is sets a baseline of what's normal behavior in your environment. And it looks at how your users access the applications, what time of day is typical for them, where they're typically from, what type of device they use. And so today it allows you to go and look at any anomalies and change your policies based on what you're seeing in there. As you'll see next year, mid to late next year, we'll be releasing a feature called risk-based access. And what that's going to allow is using this baseline so that if an end user conforms to the baseline of normal behavior, perhaps we assign them a lower risk score and they don't need to have as cumbersome or high of a level of authentication. If they do not conform to that risk score, if they're logging in from a new location that they've never logged in from before, or they're using a new device that they've never used before, things like that, we can assign them a higher risk score and then force a higher level of authentication. So I think that'll be a really interesting addition to this zero trust concept. One other area within this that we can check is device trust, whether you're running a third-party security agent. So that's nice to, again, to ensure that you've got a device that has good security posture, good hygiene. If you're using Cisco Secure Endpoint, what we used to call AMP, we can actually integrate Duo with AMP. And what that allows us to do is even if the device is trusted now, and even if the user is trusted, if AMP or Secure Endpoint detects that the device has been compromised, it can send an alert to Duo, and then Duo can prevent that device from accessing any application until it's been remediated. So it's a nice integration that provides you, again, full zero trust with that continuous inspection. And it's a great workflow too, to allow with the alerts and the way it shares data, to really allow the from an operations standpoint to dig into what's going on, remediate it, and then reactivate it back over in Duo in a fairly automated process. And then lastly, so we talk about user trust, we've talked about device trust, we've talked about creating policy. How do we apply that to all of the applications? How do we really enable that at the application level? Well, first of all, SSO, right? So instead of having all your users access those cloud applications directly, we put an SSO portal in front of it to A, make it easier for the end user, and B, allow you to have that single point of control to apply policy. Now, some folks might say, well, I've already got an SSO through an existing vendor. Well, that's fine. We can also integrate with those other SSO platforms and IDP platforms to really provide that same experience. And as far as internal applications go, we've got a gateway that allows you to provide that same level of control and access to those internal web applications that are not cloud accessible. So whether those internal apps are on-prem, whether they're in a public cloud environment, but in a sandbox, you can run that gateway. And today it supports any type of web application as well as SSH sessions. And you'll see in another month or two, we'll be releasing RDP support as well, with other TCP apps coming down the road, during the course of next year. And so really from a zero trust perspective, what you see is we've got that user trust, right? We have the identity verification, two-factor auth. We've got the device visibility, the device hygiene. We take that data, create those policies, and then we can apply that to internal or external cloud apps in a single, easily extensible platform. I'll just build this slide out here quick. And so from a zero trust standpoint, we've got that single platform that provides that across just about any application, internal or external, with that same platform, and it makes it easy. So right now I'll pause. Are there any questions at this point before I turn it over to Miles for demos?
There haven't been any questions in the chat, so I think we can continue.
Sounds good. I'll stop sharing here and turn it over to Miles. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Let me go ahead and get my share going here. Hopefully, what should come up in just a moment here is my Duo dashboard. Is that coming through on the screen share for everyone?
Yep, looks good.
Wonderful, thank you. So I wanted to actually start here and show you some of these policies, and then we'll kind of transition to the user-facing experience in the actual demos, right? So really just to kind of show you how all of these policies work, where they live, it's all here inside the what we call the admin panel. And this is hosted by us. The actual policy engine and building is all hosted by us. And here's the policy editor. And you see we have kind of this global policy and lots of things that Ryan was covering showing up here, right? We have kind of your core authentication mechanisms about, okay, what do we do with new users that we don't recognize? How are we enforcing multi-factor? What are we doing on location? When it comes to device health, looking at operating systems, browsers, plugins, et cetera, what do we do based on that information that we receive? And even going down to the authentication devices themselves, the phones that are being used to approve push notifications, what can we tell about those, and what sorts of controls do we have around the device hygiene, not just from an access device perspective, but even from an authentication device perspective. So this is where all this lives. And of course, as Ryan mentioned, you have a lot of flexibility in how you create and apply these policies. So here's this global policy, which is kind of your baseline policy set. But you can create lots of different custom policies. There's no limit to the number of different policies that you can create. And you can apply these very flexibly, right? You have the ability to apply policies to individual applications. Here I have a policy that's applied to a couple of applications, but only for a specific group of users. And all of these custom policies really allow me to kind of enhance the global policy here. And this is really useful when you're considering and moving down this zero trust path, right? Because it really is a journey. And this is the whole reason that I'm really, focusing on this for this moment, is that we want to give you the ability to, as you move, further and further down this path, that you have the ability to test this out in a way that makes sense for you, right? As you start with user identity and just kind of core MFA and making sure you've got that set, and then look ahead to taking a look at device health and device trust for different applications. We recognize that this is not going to be a one size fits all sort of journey for everyone. And so we give you a lot of flexibility here in being able to test this, as narrowly as you need to, and kind of roll that out in waves as you need to, as you kind of, cross forward on each step on this journey. So let me go ahead and actually transition to a user-facing demo here. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into this device here.
Hey, Miles, sorry to interrupt you, but there was a question
Yes.
that came in, and there was a question around that asking how do those policies align with like something like Azure AD policies and SSO?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so they're really kind of complementary, right? There's a couple of different ways that we integrate with Azure. So if you wanted to protect Azure applications with Duo, you can federate Azure with another single sign-on solution, such as like ADFS or one of the 2 different single sign-on options that are included with every paid Duo subscription. Or we have just a native integration inside of Azure using the custom controls in conditional access, right? So really how it works is going to be complementary based on those factors, right? Inside of Azure CA, you might have your own sets of policies and controls around which applications, which users will enforce MFA on and under which circumstances, right? But if you can't do that, those same sorts of controls also exist in Duo. So it really depends on how you're protecting Azure with Duo, and that'll result in which of those 2 or both of those controls are available. All right. So speaking of Azure, Microsoft 365 is actually going to be kind of our guinea pig for the demos this morning. And I'm going to start here. I'm on a domain joined machine. In fact, the actual domain controller here. And I'm going to start with just user identity, right? So here I actually have Azure federated to Duo single sign-on. So rather than having me enter my username and password on Office, it actually punted me through to Duo SSO. I had actually already authenticated my username and password earlier today, so I'm not being prompted for that again right now. And I can just jump straight to MFA, right? So I've just received a push notification to my phone. I'm approving that, and boom, I'm logged in, right? Now, this is probably familiar to most of you, either from familiarity with Duo or from other common MFA solutions out there. We have successfully completed MFA. But that's not all that we've done, and that's at least not all that we can see, at least not administratively. So if we go and take a look at the reports here, we can see not just that MFA has been performed by this user, but we can actually start to see a couple of things about the device itself, right? Including the operating system, the version of the browser that was running. There's some other information that we're capable of collecting, but weren't able to determine at this time, and we'll get into that later. But we start to get a picture of the health of the access device here. And so as we get more and more devices that start to authenticate into dual protected applications, particularly through these browser-based applications here, we're going to start to see more and more devices kind of get populated in this report. We're going to start to get a better overall picture of the security posture of devices themselves. And that's important because that's the next step on the zero trust journey, right? We're starting this piece here, right? We've got a key application, we have a user, we're making sure that we get trust of the user's identity. But as we start looking forward to looking at device trust, we can start to build a picture for ourselves just based off of information that we're passively collecting at the time of authentication. So we're showing you here this Device Insights tab inside the admin panel. We're taking a look at the major operating systems that have accessed our protected applications and just giving you this high-level breakdown of here are the percentages of devices that are up to date versus out of date or even end of life. And this is really important information because as we start to look forward to what policies we want to create to start kind of moving down this zero trust path and start to move forward with having a higher kind of base security posture across the environment, this is a good starting point, right? Helps us get a lay of the land. And we can even start getting kind of deeper into this by drilling down into the specific devices themselves, particularly, which users have which devices and what the particular security warnings are as far as those devices being out of date. We can see those things show up here in finer detail, right? And so we use this information to start to inform policies, to start to say, hey, we want to start kind of cleaning some of this up, right? We've got a fair percentage of devices that are out of date on most of the platforms here. So what can we do to start to make this better without perhaps being too heavy-handed? So let's go back to the Microsoft 365 application here. You can see I just have my global policy applied here where I don't have a ton of special rules going on here. You can see there's like no restrictions kind of listed here. There's not a lot going on the kind of mobile device side. I am, removing phone callback and SMS as authentication options just at a core MFA level because I've decided that those are not secure enough for this app or for my organization. But I want to go a step further and I want to start kind of pushing users to keep their devices up to date. And this is really important, especially in the BYO space, where we don't have a lot of direct control in all cases over users' own devices, right? So here I have a policy called Encourage Device Updates, where we can see just right off the bat, I'm going to notify users when their browsers are out of date. We can also take a look at a couple of plugins that have that we want to make sure are being kept up to date, such as Java here, for example. Even at the operating systems themselves, you can see I'm taking a look at and encouraging users to update their devices if they're too far out of date, right? Here, kind of the timing is being set to 1 month. So what does this actually look like from a user perspective now? And this is kind of fortunate. This kind of worked out fortunately because incidentally, Chrome actually released a new version between yesterday and today. So I can actually go ahead and show you this browser piece without having to do anything too fancy or out of the ordinary. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to this sign-in process here. And I get the same authentication prompt, but you see there's this very visible message to the user now that says, hey, your computer software is 1 day out of date. But you can see we're not just telling the user that there's something going on here. There's actually this button here that says, hey, let's update this, right? So I can click let's update it, and it will call out the specific issue, right? Chrome itself is out of date. Specifically, I'm 1 day out of date. And we can tell the user how to update Chrome by just taking them straight to Google's own help page on how to do so. We call this self-remediation, putting the tools in the user's hands where it makes sense to do so to push them and encourage them to keep their devices up to date. Now, the way that I have this policy configured, I'm only encouraging users to keep their devices up to date. I'm not actually enforcing anything. So you'll see there's a skip option here. I can choose to ignore this, for now at least, based on how this policy has been configured. I'm going to go ahead and do MFA and get logged right back in to Office. Now, if we go back,
Is that threshold configurable? Are you able to say like it's got to be Chrome version 46 or above?
for browsers, not specifically. For operating systems, you can get that specific, where you can choose a specific version of Windows, for example, or Mac OS, a specific build that you want to consider up to date. For browsers, it's a much simpler, notify users when they're out of date, and then there's an optional option which I'll show you here in a second to block a user that has a browser that's too far out of date. And you can control what that timing is, but it isn't version specific. So if we jump over to reports here again, we're seeing the same sort of information here for this request, right? We see that we have a device here. They're still using this outdated version of Chrome, but they were able to authenticate, right? So not a ton, not a ton of additional information really being reported here. So let's say we're kind of running in this mode for a while where we're encouraging users to keep their devices up to date. And we eventually get to the point where we say, you know what, we've given users enough time. We're starting to see some users move in the right direction, but we really want to step up the game here and make sure the devices are being kept up to date, at least for this application. Again, you have a ton of flexibility in how you create and apply these policies. So you can choose what your critical applications are, or, the varying criticality and sensitivity of the resources in your environment and the user groups that you have. You can develop custom policies for all of those different use cases. But for the simplicity's sake here, for this demo, we're just using Microsoft 365. And I have this other policy here where I want to enforce some level of device hygiene. So I'm going to switch over to that policy here. And we see some additional things popping up in the rules. So not only now am I notifying a user that their browser is out of date, but I'm also blocking users when their browser is a month out of date. Right? Same thing going with the Java plugin here. And if I drop down into operating systems, I can see that I'm actually blocking what we consider to be end-of-life OSs, right? So OSs that are old enough or have actually fallen out of formal support with the vendor, that they're considered end-of-life. You can see there's those timing rules here. We're blocking after 1 month. Right now, the rules are encouraging users to update their versions immediately, but if I were to jump into the edit menu here and just kind of show you, you have that same sort of timing capability here where you can say, hey, we don't want to notify users right away when a new Android build comes out. Maybe we'll wait 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever makes sense. And similarly, you can choose specifically kind of what static versioning you want to apply this to, or if you want to go with our dynamic updates here, we will just kind of move these needles forward on these versions as new versions of Android become available. And those same controls are available for iOS, for Windows, for Mac OS. You see those same sorts of controls here. Something else that's new in this policy here is this device health application rule set. The device health application is an application that runs in the endpoint, which allows us to gain a little bit more information than we're able to discern about the endpoint just from kind of passively collecting information through the headers in a browser session, right? So you can see now for Mac OS and Windows, we can look for things like whether the local firewall is enabled, whether local encryption is enabled, if the user has set their password. We can even watch and see if endpoint security agents are running. And because we're trying to enforce hygiene now, we actually have rules here to block when these things aren't being upheld. So let's go ahead and jump back into a demo and see what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and sign out of here and sign back in. Close that tab. And I'll just go right back to the Office sign-in page. Now this is going to encourage me to do something extra here. I had purposely turned off the device health application prior to starting this demo, so it's not running at this time. But after I complete single sign-on, it will prompt me to open. Oh, it's actually opening it already for me. Okay, so boom, right here, before I even get the option to do MFA, we are pulling the endpoint through the device health app, and we see a number of issues here based on the policies that we've configured. BitLocker is not running. It's actually not supported on this OS. There's no security agent. Windows itself isn't up to date. And because of the way we've got the policies designed here, we're not permitting access to the application from this endpoint based on those rules. Now, what's nice about this is we try to keep that same self-remediative mindset as far as how we approach this. So if I were to click on, open Windows or the Windows update issue, I can actually open Windows settings straight from here, check for updates, and install them if necessary. Some things the users, of course, can't do themselves. So I checked on Security Agent. I have just kind of a customized message here that says, hey, please contact support@companyxyz.local for help with this. There's even a little bit of user education going on here where a user can explore why it's important that they have some sort of endpoint security agent running. And of course, we just have a customizable message down here that says, hey, if you need any help, just contact the IT help desk. You can configure this to be however you want. The idea here is, again, we want to be protective of our critical resources, based on our own security priorities, perhaps based on the level of privilege that certain groups of users have in some of these applications. Give the users as much tools as we can to fix some of these things themselves, and if not, make it as easy for the users as possible to know where they need to go for help to perhaps remediate some of these. All right. And in fact, I don't want to kind of forget about the reporting aspect of this. Now, if I go back and check the reports, I'll see, yeah, actually this user was denied access because their endpoint wasn't healthy. And if I pop open the access device information here, I do see a bit of information that we weren't seeing previously before I made sure that, before we made sure the device health app wasn't running. I can see there's a firewall. There was no encryption enabled. There were no security agents running that we were able to detect. And so for that reason, we did not permit this device we didn't permit this authentication to succeed, right? We denied it right off the bat. So we're getting, a little bit far along the path now of establishing device trust, because really for us, device trust means a couple of things. It means the security posture of the device, which is what we're seeking to address with these policies and these tools here. But then there's also the management status of the device itself, right? We want to see, hey, we want to be able to see what are our corporate devices and what do we do for access to devices that aren't corporate managed, right? So let's take a look at a policy that does that. So let's say I've gotten to the point now where the lay of the land is looking a little bit better. I've got, devices that are more or less up to date through a combination of our own, endpoint management solutions that are keeping devices up to date, complemented by these access policies that say, hey, for, to kind of cover our BYO use cases, let's make sure that our users' devices are meeting a minimum standard of security hygiene. But now we want to go that step further and say, hey, this particular asset is sensitive or important enough that we want to make sure that only our corporate managed applications are allowed to log into it, right? So we have this policy right here, which is very simple. I've just created a rule that says, hey, for access to Microsoft 365, we're going to make sure that only trusted endpoints, or in this case, managed endpoints, are allowed to authenticate. Now we can determine this sort of management status in a couple of different ways. Sometimes we're looking to an MDM to provide us with information about the hardware devices that are enrolled in it. Sometimes we're just checking to make sure that that a Windows machine is domain joined. It's actually the latter of those two that I'm using in this particular demo. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. I'm going to go back to office.com and leap back around on this authentication. We're going to go back to the sign-in page here. And I just get straight to MFA. I get the push on my phone, I approve it, and I am logged in. Now to the user, this doesn't appear any different than kind of that initial MFA test that we did, or that initial demo that we did. And that's great, right? Because that means that for the user, this has become frictionless. But critically, we can see something happening behind the scenes. So if I go back and check the report for this authentication, I can see this last key piece here. We have determined that this device is trusted, right? So even though the user didn't see anything different compared to when we started off, we have confirmed that this is in fact a trusted endpoint, and so we have granted this device access. We can contrast that with a non-trusted device. So I have this VM up here just running in Azure. It is not part of my domain, and therefore it is untrusted. So I'm going to try signing in as this user. And I don't have the app running, so I have to launch that now. Make sure that is running now. Cool. And boom, just we're sorry, access is not allowed because I am using a personal device. So even though I have this device health app running and we're able to collect some information about the health of this endpoint, even if this device is perfectly healthy and I'm passing all of the checks around the endpoint security agent and keeping the device up to date, keeping the browser up to date, what have you, it doesn't matter. This device is not trusted and therefore we're not going to permit access. And sure enough, if I go back and check my authentication log and refresh this, I'm going to see, yep, this endpoint was determined to not be trusted, and therefore we denied it access to the application.
A quick question about this. So we're kind of dealing with a situation right now where we've been kind of tasked for, like OneDrive, for example. We are using OneDrive on our domain joined computers, and there's been questions about whether or not we don't want people to be able to install or access even like the portal.office or OneDrive on a personal computer. And with the conditional access and hybrid joined, our UPNs don't match up with what's in Azure. So we're having some issues being able to successfully apply a policy to a domain joined computer. This would actually fulfill that piece of it, I guess, from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it is really kind of user agnostic, right? So for us, we can recognize users by a number of different values. I don't have anything actually I do, I forgot. So I have this primary username value here, but I've populated additional values that can be used to identify this, including my email address, including the user principal name value here, the MSDS principal name value here. All of these are tracking back to this one user. And so we can identify the user for MFA identification purposes. But yes, I think what you're correctly inferring here is that the mechanism that I'm using for determining device trust is not actually kind of user specific, right? Of course, we need to be able to identify the user. But once we've done that, we're separately looking at the domain membership status of the device to make sure, to determine if it's trusted.
Right. And the device trusted piece, that's an agent that runs on a domain joined computer, right?
That's how we're
agent.
So that's how we're detecting that it's trusted or not. So that's where that device health app comes in. It allows us to, at the time of authentication, look at the domain SID on the endpoint and say, does this match up with what we've pre-configured? The actual domain SID I've configured in here in the admin panel to say, oh, wait, sorry, this is the wrong integration here. Where is the one that I have? Here we go. Sorry, I have a lot of those. I've actually plugged my domain SID in right here, which I've collected from my domain controller. And so the device health app is looking for this each time an endpoint tries to authenticate to the application.
So really it's just a GUID or a SID from our domain that gets inputted in there, and there's no actual deployments of any type of agents on a computer then. And
well, it's this plus the device health app, right? Which you might already be using. But how this piece, it does check through that device health app that I have running on this machine to do that.
Okay. Is this piece included with our current licensing? Or is this an additional?
I'm not sure what your current licensing is. The trusted endpoints feature is on Beyond Edition of Duo. So if you know whether or not you're on Beyond, that would be that answer.
Okay.
So one of the other things I wanted to touch on here too was, Ryan made mention of how we want to kind of expand this to cover all of our different use cases, right? And some of those might be tricky, right? Because we have a lot of applications that don't use a traditional kind of web-based login, right? And so for some of those, you might solve that through like AnyConnect VPN, right? through AnyConnect, we can determine and enforce device trust prior to allowing a VPN connection to be established. There are other options as well. Brian made mention to the ability to proxy SSH connections through what we call the Duo Network Gateway. So let me actually go ahead and show you that user experience here. I hope this actually works because my actual Linux host broke on me earlier today. All right, awesome. So here, even though we're starting a traditional SSH session, through some local kind of proxy magic and through the actual reverse proxy that is proxying connections to this SSH host that I'm running in Azure, we're actually providing this single sign-on flow. And again, I've already authenticated previously for Office, so I'm jumping straight to the MFA piece here. We're doing that push notification for MFA, which I am receiving and approving on my device. And now that I have completed that, you'll see I'm actually being prompted now to do I just have, plain password authentication set up here. Whoops, I got clicked out of the sign-on box here. There we go. So now I'm logged in here. And again, critically, what was not apparent to the user, but which I can confirm behind the scenes here, is that during that authentication attempt, we determined the device was trusted. And in fact, if I go look at the policy that I've applied here, I have that same require manage devices policy applied to the SSH servers that I've published through the Duo Network Gateway. So we're still able to get, and again, you can apply all of these other policies we've talked about, right? For device trust, for device hygiene, for encouraging users to keep their devices up to date versus forcing them to be up to date. Because we've now opened this up to be able to provide that web-based logon, even for a traditionally non-web authentication, that opens up all of these possibilities for us to provide that zero trust capability for this use case. Now, the last thing that I wanted to demo for you this morning is something that I don't actually have a live environment for. So we'll defer to kind of the click-through demos here, which you're welcome to visit anytime at your convenience. This is at demo.duo.com, which is a public page. Like most Duo documentation, this is all publicly available. You don't need a Duo account to see any of this. But what I'm going to demo for you here is the Cisco AMP for endpoints. This is a really nice, unique integration between different components of the Cisco security portfolio, which really helps kind of bring a comprehensive added zero trust value to your environment. So we're going to see what happens here when a user with a device that is normally considered trusted tries to authenticate, but where AMP has determined, or I'm sorry, Cisco Secure Endpoint now has determined that the device has been compromised. So we're going to see the user try to log in, and similar to that non-trusted endpoints messaging that we've seen before, we're showing the same sort of message here that says, sorry, we've blocked this device from accessing the application, and please reach out to your IT help desk. Now, if we look as an administrator, as a user contacts the help desk and tries to figure out what's going on here, we can see, hey, this was blocked by AMP for endpoints, right? We've denied this request. And in fact, we can see that additional confirmation here. If we expand out the access device information, we'll see that this is not a trusted endpoint any longer because the AMP check failed. And that's really important, right? We don't want endpoint trust to necessarily be static, right? We want important information or events like a security incident to be able to affect whether or not this device is trusted. And that's what we're enabling here with AMP. So if we jump over into the AMP dashboard now, we will take a look at the particular endpoint that is in question, and we'll see that there's a number of issues going on here. And of course, the help desk will work with the user to figure out what's gone wrong, and then to, of course, try and remediate this. But once this is said and done, we will mark this particular event as resolved. And behind the scenes, the two kind of pieces here, Cisco Secure Endpoint as well as Duo's engine, are communicating. We're being informed on the Duo side that this endpoint has now been remediated. So this user can go back into the application again, and from there on, it's their usual expected MFA experience. So device trust has been reestablished, and we can verify that here through the dashboard. Everything is normal. All right, This is exactly where I wanted to wind up timing wise, more or less, for the end of the demo period here. I wanted to make sure we had some time here for any additional questions based on the things that we've discussed or the things that we've shown this morning.